What is up, Internet? I am Taylor. Welcome back to my channel, and this is my review of the Seminal. Yeah, I said Seminal. Don't get it dirty, you sons of bitches. Uh, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This is a beat-to-hell copy. It's probably not I don't think it's my original copy. I think my original copy got lost somewhere, but this is my copy. I'm not giving it to you. You have to get your own. But you can stay tuned and watch through this video to figure out how to win who the winner of last week's book, the Sixth Gun, was. So watch and hopefully enjoy the review, and then see if you won last week's. I do tend to give away books, on a fairly regular basis, especially on these Tuesday review kind of shows. So watch my Tuesday review shows, people. They don't get a lot of views, so your chances are pretty good of winning. All right, anyways, let's get into this. This is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This book is 30 years old, probably close to that. I don't know if this volume is, or this edition is, but it's considered one of the best resources as far as, like, the theory of comic book craft goes. And it's, some of that, actually, I think is probably because there's not a lot written on the craft of comics, really, compared to like other art forms and other volumes and everything like that. Like it's a sorely underrepresented medium as far as educational books go, really, honestly. And this one is considered one of the best, and it probably really is. It's broken into chapters that are very easy to read, and it's easily illustrated as a comic book by Scott McCloud. Scott McCloud, before this, wrote a comic book called Zot. I've not read a lot of it, but it's pretty highly praised. And there are some dated references here. There's like Cerebus and like some Rod Liefeld stuff. And, it's just kind of the time in some ways. And it's broken into 7 chapters. The chapters, I think, lose a little bit of their luster as they go on. Like, the chapter 1 is trying to explain what a comic book is and what a comic is, and it does a pretty decent job of it, although for whatever reason Scott McCloud doesn't consider single-panel cartoons comics. And he tries to explain that away later on because of his definition of time and how it works and panels, and the necessity in his mind of having a progression of multiple things in order to make it a comic and not a cartoon. I think it's pretty nitpicky. I think it's a pretty tight definition there. And that kind of leads me into a few of my other issues with this book. I will say, like I said, it's very well illustrated. It's very clearly presented. It's very easy to read. I like his style as far as illustration goes, and I like the lettering, which, I'd bitch about it if I didn't, because if you ever watch any of my other videos, I tend to hate bad lettering. But what Scott will do is he'll present a lot of his ideas without any like documentation backing it up. He'll say, "Oh, this is the uncanny valley," and blah 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 blah, and then he'll go on to his theory of the uncanny valley, and he'll present it as fact, and then he'll say, "Well, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think." And I don't quite love that approach. Like, he goes into he'll have references, he'll have these charts that he makes up, and he has these graphs and things, a way of explaining things. Some work better than others. But he does present it all as a fact, which, I mean, textbooks generally tend to do, and this probably is really sort of a textbook on comic books. But then he doesn't provide like a lot of like his source material, or where he gets these ideas from, or where these theories are from. So you have to do some digging around. This is a good introductory thing, but if you really want to understand it, say, especially like saying things like the uncanny valley and how it pertains to human vision and representation in comics and seeing ourselves in comics, and his theory, which I don't also 100% buy, that the more abstracted a face is, the more likely you are to relate to it in a comic book, as opposed to like specific drawings where you can't relate because it's not about you. I don't think humans are quite that shallow, and I don't think they're quite that delicate when it comes to reading, but he just presents it as like gospel truth, and then he'll move on to the next topic, which also presents as sort of gospel truth, which is like panel borders and how time works, and like the progression of time in comics, which is a complex thing on the best of days. He does his best to break it down simply. Sometimes he does it better than others. It's just kind of like some of it just kind of gets lost when he starts going off on his personal biases, and I think every author's guilty of this. It's just kind of fairly easy to see, because it's a comic book in this volume. Because It's a one-man thing. I don't know. I'm assuming it was edited. Yeah, there are editors and advice and like by some of the bigger names in the industry, like Kurt Busiek, Neil Gaiman, Bob Lapin, like some Will Eisner, and some of the bigger names in here did edit this, but I don't think it was edited by anyone with a background in textbooks. Maybe I could be wrong. I don't know all the names on here, so it could have been. But I just think it could have used at least a once-over in that regard. Now, that said, it's still probably worth reading for everybody. If you like the idea of learning more about the craft of comics and the theory of comics and like what makes it a unique medium, then this is going to be the book for you. You do not need to read this in order to understand comic books. You can read a comic book and pretty much understand it by the end of a first issue of a comic or any issue of a comic what is going on, especially if you've read like cartoon newspapers back when they were a thing, or if you've like comic strips or anything like that, you're gonna understand how to read a comic. It's sort of like watching. It's probably like watching a film, right? You don't need to learn film theory to enjoy a film, and I think maybe in some regards, the more you learn about film theory and stuff, the less you probably enjoy some things. Like you'll have somebody who's very critical of films and somebody who's seen a lot and like learned it and studied it, and then they'll come along and they'll tell you your favorite film is crap for this and this and this reasons. Well, they just wreck your enjoyment of it. There's a little bit of that can probably happen if you read this. Like, you're going to look at comics a little bit differently after reading this, and it might kill some of your enjoyment. But I do think there are enough ideas presented in here that are worth at least exploring. Do not take any comic or any book or this review or anything as gospel. Make up your own mind. But this, I think, would help open your mind and delve into ideas that your brain and you probably do take for granted when you're reading a comic book, especially some of the panel border stuff and some of the way time works in comics. I think that's pretty interesting stuff. Towards the end of this book, Scott's really gets into like opinion and subjectivity. He uses an example of several different people trying to break into the comic book world, and his examples they're all, maybe it's done for space and for editing purposes, but his examples are all like following one path, and then they stop. But if you want to succeed, you have to do this and this and this, so as if there's only one path to comic book success. And it mostly involves a whole lot of self-torture and hours and lots and lots of self-loathing and that kind of thing. You don't know if that's necessarily true. And some of this just doesn't date extremely well because there are references to 90s comics in here. And it's sort of the way he talks about it. It's like as if like it's more emotional than earlier comic books. And again, like he's got his definite preferences when he's talking about things, and it's very, very, very American centric as far as it goes. In the history bit, he touches a little bit upon like cave art and other that kind of stuff, and he does like give a nod to manga a few times throughout this book, but it's a Eurocentric thing. I mean, and not even Eurocentric. There's not a lot of like European comics discussed in here, other than like Hergé and like a few others, like Mobius a little bit. But for the most part, it's American comic books he's talking about. So it's not flawless by any means. And I don't know, what I took from it, it's sort of like, I wish comics had progressed further since this was written. Like, this was written 30 years ago, and there really hasn't been a lot of progression. There's been new forms of it, like digital comics and stuff, but they haven't really been embraced by the general public, or at least the comic book collecting public. And I think that's part of that is like, and this is, again, my personal bias and my personal thoughts is that folks, at least in the market or in the world I travel in, want to own the collectible item. And so the digital thing, while it probably is the wave of the future for a lot of reasons, it just doesn't seem like it's quite there yet. And then it also seems like there's not been any kind of real innovation since this has come out, other than printing innovation. This doesn't really deal with digital printing a lot because in the 90s it was a thing, but it wasn't like it is now where every comic book is printed digitally. And so almost every. I mean, I'm generalizing. There's probably are some that are silk screened or some that are other things, but for the most part, comics are printed digitally now. And it just sort of seems like that's been the innovation, but there hasn't been a lot of storytelling innovation or really any like artists that I can think of that have like explored the medium as the medium itself and like really pushed it to an edge. It sort of does seem like that comics are stagnant, and this, like, you can read this and it's up to date enough where you're like, oh yeah, there's not much that's happened since then. And again, that's my opinion. See, I'm turning into Scott McCloud. My opinion. I'd love to hear your arguments down below. It is still. I mean, like, if you want to learn a bit of comic history, read the first chapter. If you want to learn comic theory and like Scott's probably fairly widely accepted as almost truth in certain ways, read the rest of the book. It's good. I mean, it's very good. I would not be able to do this. For this being a one-man show, other than, well, the lettering was done by Bob Lappin, I believe, but this is an incredible volume to have been produced by one person. And there's a reason it does hold up, and there's a reason that it is still highly lauded and highly read. But I'm also kind of surprised now that how many folks don't know about it. I kind of mentioned I was going to do this review in another live stream, and a lot of people just kind of stared at me blankly. So I think maybe I'm hoping this I'm not vain enough to think that my review is going to go viral or that it's going to like lead a whole lot of people to this, but I hope maybe one or two other people do pick this up because it is worth reading. Again, if you like your surface level stuff and you like reading comics and just enjoying them without thinking about them too much, don't do this. Honestly, don't. But if you want to like maybe delve on a little bit more into like thinking critically about stuff and like thinking and deconstructing comics. Maybe deconstructing is a better word than understanding would have been for the title. But yeah, if you want to deconstruct comics a bit, pick this up. All right, it's probably a pretty short review. What am I on? I have no idea. Like, see, I need something that tells me how many minutes I go, so I get that 10-minute mark and get monetized and make millions of dollars and write my own book called Comics. Good enough. Or fine. They're fine. Honestly, yeah, I think that is the state of comics today. They're fine. Like, I don't think they're fantastic. I think there's a reason they're not called the Golden Age, and I think there's anymore, and it's kind of just kind of... I know that we're in an independent comic book renaissance, but they're not really indie books. They're just creator-owned, and I think there's a difference. I think creator-owned comics are still telling pretty straightforward, standard stories. Just the creators are treated better, which is a good thing. But indie comics, I think, should be pushing the boundaries, and I don't think there's been a lot of boundary pushing. I know I'll kind of circle back to that. I am not organized into 7 chapters. I just fucking ramble, people. It's what I do. So there we have it. That's probably really going to wrap up my review of this. The winner of the 6th gun, I will leave a screenshot in one of these corners. It's Gary B, the casual comics guy, because it's clearly rigged. Clearly. No, actually, he just followed directions. He left a comment and watched the video. Now, he actually has to watch this one for me to mail it out to him. So don't, you sons of bitches, tell him. I want him to watch it. Or you can tell him. I don't care. Whatever. He's a very nice guy. He's done amazing things to help grow the community. I'll make the exception. You all can freely shout out Gary B. and let him know he won this. But for the most part, I just kind of like, I'm giving things away so people watch the next one. So my comic channel grows and expands and spreads like herpes. Speaking of which, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe bell, hit the notification thingamajigger so you know when I go live or you know when I drop new videos. Because it all helps, folks. It all helps the algorithms. And I'd like to get to 1,000 followers. If I get to 1,000 followers, I'm going to have a heck of a giveaway, and you can win some stuff. Maybe even worldwide. Maybe not. I'm a cheap bastard when it comes to shipping, and that's kind of why this was only U.S. shipping, because I paid $1 for this comic. I don't want to pay $40 to ship it somewhere. So, all right. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, even if you're trying to understand the world of comic books, don't be a dick about it. See ya.